But illegal immigrants can steal IDs and then file for over and get payments for child tax credits fraudulently, never get prosecuted. Explain how this can happen.
You and your guest, Laura, were talking a lot about the deep state earlier in your show, and I would propose that the IRS is the original deep state operation.
One of those things that we identified they want to spend billions of dollars on is to hire 87,000 more IRS agents. Imagine an army of IRS agents coming after the bank accounts of hardworking families.
Joseph R. Bannister, a former IRS Criminal Investigation Division special agent, has blown the whistle on an IRS fraudulently collecting federal income tax from Americans through a scheme he calls the 1040A scam. After resigning in 1999, Bannister spent over 25 years exposing what he alleges is systemic IRS fraud, including the manipulation of internal computer systems to assess taxes, penalties, and interest against individuals who have not voluntarily filed tax returns. Bannister argues that IRS notices referencing Form 1040A in cases where no such form was filed serve as evidence of this fraud, as the agency falsely inputs data to create tax liabilities. Bannister asserts that most Americans are not legally required to file federal income tax returns or pay income tax, citing the absence of a law imposing liability on the average American since 1916. He points to the IRS's own publications, which state that only those liable for a tax must file a return, and notes that federal law primarily imposes income tax liability on non-resident aliens and foreign corporations. The 1916 Supreme Court decision in Brushaber versus Union Pacific Railroad Company limited the scope of the 16th Amendment, ensuring that subsequent tax laws excluded average Americans from liability, a structure Bannister claims was intentional to maintain constitutional compliance. The 1040A scam involves the IRS allegedly inputting fraudulent codes into its computer systems, specifically referencing Form 1040A, to create the appearance that individuals requested the IRS to calculate their tax liability. Bannister provides evidence from his own case where IRS notices and individual master file transcripts referenced a Form 1040A he never filed. He explains that the IRS uses the unique feature of Form 1040A, which allows filers to request tax calculations by the IRS to justify fraudulent assessments. This pattern, he claims, has been repeated against millions of Americans, even after Form 1040A was discontinued in 2018, with notices morphing to reference a non-existent Form 1040A. Bannister calls for further investigation into the IRS's archaic computer systems, which he believes are maintained to perpetuate this fraud. He suggests that the IRS's reliance on outdated technology and reluctance to provide IMF transcripts via FOIA requests conceal the scam's mechanics. Bannister urges Elon Musk, President Trump, and the Doge fraud hunters to probe the IRS's internal programming for evidence of fraudulent data manipulation. Comparing the 1040A scam to other alleged government deceptions, Bannister argues that the IRS's actions fit a broader pattern of misleading the public, defrauding Americans of trillions over decades.
While most Americans had to write a big fat check to the government today to pay their taxes, over 100,000 federal workers are not paying their taxes. In 2021, the IRS found that almost 150,000 federal workers owe about $1.5 billion in unpaid taxes. Over 5,000 of them work at the IRS and owe $50 million in overdue taxes.
John Bound reporting for InfoWars.
Good morning, America. This is Steel News, and welcome to the War Zone. Let's cut through the illusion, shall we? We've been told that the IRS, the Department of Justice, and the federal judiciary stand as guardians of law and order. God, I could almost choke just saying that. But nowhere in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, that beautiful parchment that Nancy 3 Martinis Pelosi likes to reference as a relic, does the 19 essential services of government, you know, the ones that Congress is supposed to say this is okay to do, the ones that we gave Congress the right to do, in fact, yeah, that's right, we the people of the government. Nowhere in there will you ever find the IRS, the DOJ, or federal court bureaucracy listed. These are not constitutional bodies of service. They are unelected bureaucracies, corporate fictions, sustained by agency power, and of course, doing what they always love to do, masquerading as government. What they are behaving like is a RICO, a racketeering influence criminal organization cartel using falsified records, fake codes, and fraudulent certifications to steal property and liberty from the American people. What you saw in the open with former IRS Joe Bannister, former IRS agent, Joe Bannister, he warned us decades ago about the 1040A scam, a system where the IRS simply pretends people filed returns they never filed. Today, you're going to hear how whistleblowing became reality in the case of Ebenezer Ben Howe. After 6 years of litigation, Ben has irrefutable evidence backed by government admissions that the IRS falsified his records, DOJ covered it up, and the judiciary enabled it. And now his home is on the line. With him are Michael Ellis and Bob McNeil, now dubbed the Three Musketeers of Truth, who together are pulling back the curtain on how America's agencies are no longer bound by law, but operate as organized crime syndicates in robes and suits. Ben Howe is an oil engineer, a longtime professional, and now at the center of a federal forfeiture battle. Through his persistence in biannual FOIA requests, you know, those Freedom of Information Act requests, he captured the key IRS documents, the 2011 MDISA screen that proves beyond doubt that the IRS falsified his records. Ben's legal strategy has become the frontline case in exposing the IRS fraud that Joe Bannister warned about. Michael Ellis, who is a longtime teacher and historian from a family of educators, he's dedicated himself to defending those oppressed by injustice, rooted in Judeo-Christian faith and the Western legal tradition. He and his wife of 30 years are raising seven children and grandchildren in North Texas while he fights for liberty and justice for all. He's become a true freedom fighter. And Bob McNeil, born in the late 40s, but a Marine Corps veteran who's been an absolutely exemplary, public servant of many varieties. He's an accountant, an auditor, and oil and gas financial consultant. And after retiring in 2015, he devoted his life to exposing the IRS DOJ corruption through litigation. As a father and grandfather, Bob stands as living proof that service to country doesn't end with the uniform. General Flynn also comes to mind. He's been preparing for years to fight the storm he knew was coming. And he himself hasn't filed a tax return since 2000. So you see here, folks, what I'm trying to get at is these are ordinary Americans with extraordinary talent, meaning they are taking their gifts from God and they're bringing them forward to fight the demon, the beast that is hopefully going to see Babylon fall. Let's see if we can't get these gentlemen up here on the stage with us today. We've got Ben Howe, who is the man of the hour, the man who is behind this big fight, along with his compatriot Michael Ellis and Bob McNeil. Gentlemen, it is a pleasure to have you three on this morning, the Three Musketeers of Truth, who are in a very valiant and gallant battle, staring down the face of a very sinister cartel known as the United States government. Welcome.
Thanks, Ann.
Thank you, Ann.
Yeah, I'm just honored to have all of you on. This is a momentous moment. We've been dropping some truth bombs thanks to the evidence you've been providing me now for the last month or so. Actually, it started with Michael months ago, sending me emails and a conversation, Michael, I'll never forget because you then referenced it in a subsequent email where you said, my eyes glazed over. It's a lot of information to take in, but in its simplest form, it is fraud, it is racketeering, and it's a conspiracy on the federal government to steal from we, the American people. So I'd like to start with Ben Howe. You are the aggrieved party from whom the federal government has singled you out, along with millions of other Americans, as we're going to learn from Joe Bannister again in the future. He's joining this esteemed team here at some point in the future later today. Ben, for our audience, can you just sort of, since they're just now learning about your case, can you walk us through your backstory, how this all began with the government targeting your property?
Well, I started off, I read some stuff from that Irwin Schiff wrote, Federal Mafia, the book, way back in the mid 90s. And then I was just like, I was in the Marine Corps too, by the way. So I've seen government waste at a regular, it happens all the time. Anyway, I got just fed up and I read about it. I started finding out about liability. There is none. So I filed 0 returns and just put a 2-page addendum and asked the IRS questions for 3 years on show me where this law is, just things like that. And crickets. You didn't hear any, and no answer at all. So I just quit filing. Probably 2004, 2005. It's just like they won't answer. I won't answer. Fine.
Right.
Because I was working off and on overseas. I've worked in West Africa. I've worked in the Middle East. So I wasn't filing anything, and I didn't hear anything from them until I actually bought the property in, I think it was 2013. And then a couple years later, and then part of the complaint that they filed against me was that I used an LLC to try to hide something, but I used my own social security number because I never thought in my lifetime that the courts would be so corrupt as to take and not compel the government to produce any of these phantom documents. So I wasn't really worried about it. I used my own social security number because it's really not that hard to hide stuff with an LLC. I did the LLC specifically because I was working overseas. It was easier than going and getting a lawyer to sign a power of attorney every month when I left the country.
Sure.
Anyway, that's when I believe that Marler, who has worked for the small business part of the IRS, they finally had a piece of property that they could try to go after because they'd stolen a couple $100 from bank accounts from time to time. But they could finally go after the property. So I started getting letters, and they would ask stupid questions like, is this an inconvenience? Well, yeah, having your house stolen would be an inconvenience.
Right.
So I didn't, like I said, I didn't think that I would have any problem if I went to court because it was painfully obvious that they don't have any documents. And so in 2019, in November, I got served with a complaint from the government alleging I owed some astronomical fiction number that they came up with. And that's when I had actually heard Bob on Talk Shoe Radio in like 2016 or 17 and talked to him. I told him I'd gotten served. I hadn't met Michael yet, but Michael's been the legal strategy behind all of this because they had the missing pieces. I just knew that I wasn't liable. And so I would, every 2 years, like you mentioned in your opening, I would request a FOIA and I didn't even realize what I had at the time. And when I gave that, Michael knew exactly what it was when it was there. And just so your audience knows, the MDSA is an artifact from the AIM system, which is an ancillary computer system that allows injection into your master file. And that was the proof that they were doing that. And then ever since then, the fight's been on since 2019.
Incredible. Truly incredible what you've been going through. And I find it very extraordinary and very telling, actually, that you stopped filing in the early 2000s and they didn't bother you until you had something they could take of significant value. That's when they came after you. And they equated it to being in your name because you attached a social security number to it, which that's another topic that I've broken down many times, and I'd like to break down some more for my audience because that social security number really is the bane of our existence when it comes to transacting and opting in with the federal government and contracting. You know, Joe Bannister, who you saw in the open in his piece, and he's an incredible IRS whistleblower, former IRS federal agent, actually first exposed this 1040 scam years ago. Did you realize what he was warning about was exactly what was going to happen to you, or were you not aware of Joe Bannister when this first started happening to you?
I had heard of Joe Bannister. I know that because he hadn't filed, he'd been a CID agent with the IRS. They're actually, by the way, the only ones that are allowed to carry guns, according to the IRS manual. But I'd heard of him, but I didn't know specifically about the 1040A. And my biggest thing that I didn't find out was how they were committing the fraud by injecting records in there, because I knew that you had to volunteer for it, and I wasn't going to volunteer for anything except them to leave me alone. Mm-hmm. So I didn't know anything about the how they went about it. It wasn't until I heard Bob on Talk Shoe that I found out that they were violating 18 USC 1001 and falsifying records. And then I didn't know how they were doing it, but I actually ended up having a piece of paper that proved it. And Michael was the one that knew exactly what it was when he saw it. But I was unaware of how they were doing it. I just knew that you had to volunteer to do it. I didn't know that they would actually just do it regardless.
Right. So I'm going to bring Michael in here because, Michael, I want to talk to you about this exhibit sitting right here. This is Exhibit A. This is the Revenue Officers Training Handbook. And specifically, you have Chapter 23. Why is this relative to the exhibits that were presented in court as evidence to back up what Mr. Howe was talking about, that, he should not have had to file, and what the government did was, woefully way out of line?
Good morning, Anthony. Real thing that I found here with this was that the revenue officers are trained to recognize that their primary enforcement statute, that's called 6020B, does not apply to income tax. And they literally state it, quote, for constitutional reasons. So their main enforcement statute does not apply, does not authorize them to be able to attack people for the income tax. That's the revenue officer's handbook. And when I saw that, it supported the other pieces of information that they had no authority to enforce the voluntary income tax. This in turn explains why they had to falsify their internal records, their individual master file records, because it's voluntary. There are restrictions literally built into that software that prevent them from moving ahead to attack people like Ben, unless that person has voluntarily asked the IRS to prepare a return for them. That's the 1040A scam that Joe has, at least from a distance, he's been able to determine there's something wrong with what they're doing internally. We have analyzed their internal records, their software records, their procedural manuals, and we've determined exactly how they do it, why they do it, and what the results are.
Insane, absolutely insane. During your discovery, you asked the DOJ to produce that signed 1040A return. Their records claimed that, existed, right? This is how they had to get the scam. They had to show that Mr. Howe filed a 1040A, but didn't pay. So we had basically several years of what they called filed 1040A returns to prove that Mr. Howe never paid the taxes he claimed he owed on the 1040A. So they could then go and sue him. The United States could sue Mr. Howe for an asset forfeiture, his home, which right now is in process of being forfeited and taken by the United States government. In fact, we're up against a hard deadline next week because you're battling this and appealing this in the Ninth Circuit out in the district in which Mr. Howe lives. They admitted in writing, by the way, that they did not have a record to prove that this 1040A even existed. So they create the record, they, quote, file it, they create a debt, if you will, and they expunge it. So it's not even there. But there's computers that actually track those transactions of the record being made and the record being deleted. So you can actually see that master file, Mr. Howe's individual master file, was actually manipulated. Yet the court saying, well, we don't have a 1040A, so we can't prove this. When you heard this, what went through your head when you read that concession, knowing that they're still operating as if this 1040A actually exists and the debt was created?
Well, let's just make this kind of clear. The 1040A part of this scandal is that they make it look like you asked the IRS to prepare a return for you. That's what they need to do to be able to open a back door, to be able to put into the IMF annual record the claimed deficiency amount. Let me say it this way. Without them getting the individual master file software to reflect that you supposedly filed a 1040A on a given date, well, they can't input the deficiency amounts. This is a really cool proof that the entire thing is voluntary, because it's not only that they don't have a way to enter the deficiency amount directly from a substitute income tax return that they prepare, but they have no way to be able to enter that deficiency amount unless they make it look like you have asked for a return to be done.
Right.
That's the 1040A part of it. There isn't any such thing that exists, even though their records show. Example here, you're looking at one of them that says up in the upper left-hand corner, this is a transcript that shows that 1040A is the subject of this whole deal up there in that top left-hand corner. I don't know if you can read it, but at 1040A, when you go ask for them, as you said, Ann, we asked during this case. In fact, Ben had a very good idea about he was going to do something in case they showed those. I think, if you don't mind, Ann, ask Ben what his idea was to offer to the government during the course of this about the 1040. Ben,
go for it.
Oh, so we initially filed, I think it was document 11 out of 300. We motioned for dismissal. Well, when we didn't hear crickets from them about that, I had talked to Michael. I said, what if we just offer to concede the whole case? We'll just quit if they can produce one iota of proof.
Right.
And he was like, that's great, because we know they don't exist. So we asked them for the alleged substitute for returns that they submitted to examinations. We asked them for the 1040As that shows up on my master file. And the DOJ attorneys and the black robed attorneys, crickets, nothing. Right. They never even addressed the fact that we offered to just concede the whole case. So what is it, Rule 1 of Federal Civil Procedure for quick and immediate justice? They could have ended this crap in like December of 2019. They didn't have it. At that point, we knew for positive they didn't have jack. And so this should have been a slam dunk. We didn't hear anything from them at all.
That was in 2019, Ann. It's
right.
gone on 2019 all the way to this year, when the judge finally woke up after 18 months of silence, and he suddenly just says, case won by the government.
Yeah. Because he's the black robe tyrant, and he can slam the gavel and just decide to call balls and strikes and not follow the rule of law. You know, Bob, you're an auditor, right? When a party admits that they can't produce the underlying records, what does that tell you about fraud?
Well, it certainly wakes up my senses about it, because I was trained, to identify fraud and stop it, and I did that for 40 years. So when Michael presented these records to me to look at, and then I went out and submitted my own FOIA to get my own, I saw the same pattern of transaction codes that Michael showed me initially on my records as well. So from there, I determined, and Michael and I both agreed, this is a systemic problem, and so we need to take this, expand our review.
Okay, so you've expanded the review. I want to pull up here this Exhibit F, because I think this is quite telling as well. Let's go back. I just want to get the title of it up here, because it's just, let's take a look at this, shall we? This is Exhibit F, Certificate of Official Record, whereas you have the Chief Accounting Operations signing off on this from the United States of America, Department of Treasury, IRS, and it's a certification of lack of record. Can you walk us through this, Bob? Because this, to me, is just an extraordinary piece of information here.
Well, this is called the Form 4340. We've dealt with this for years and years. We get them, we request them for every lawsuit that we've ever filed. In fact, we filed a lot of them over the years. Going back a little bit, when we first got involved in this and we saw this pattern being repeated and repeated by other people who contacted me, Michael and I sent out the word that we'd like to form a class action. And so we went about doing that. I gathered names and people who wanted to participate and all that. And we submitted a motion to the judge to certify us as a class action suit. And he refused to do it. So, we knew right there that, something was up. But this form, can we get it back a second?
Sure. So
this sort of mirrors the a notice of federal tax lien in it. It has the same date, has the same identification, the same descriptions, and it just tells the story from start to finish about where they started, where the IRS started assessing the non-existent liability of Ben, and then how they went through the process of taking action against him.
Okay, so let's move this into Ben's emergency at the moment, and we're going to come back and talk a little bit more about the fraud. But Ben, we are sitting in an emergency. Today is Friday, August 29th. By next Friday, U.S. Marshals are going to take your house. You have an appeal right now sitting in the Ninth Circuit. You've got an emergency Rule 8 motion to stay the sale of your home. The DOJ responded saying your appeal was, quote, premature and there was no sale to stay. How do you respond to that?
You're live, so I won't use a bunch of 4-letter words. I'm pretty good at stringing those
Thank
together.
you.
But it's a load of crap. They don't have anything. Their case is actually the frivolous one, but I got a letter that was dated early August. They send it. I have a mail service in Casper because I'm out in the field all of the time. And they sent it to the Casper address, and they said September 9th. I think it's actually PALS, that is a division of the IRS, property something and liquidation specialist. They're taking control of the property on September 5th. And then I guess if I was there to fight them, I'm going to be gone, so it's not a problem. But then the marshals would come in. But so we've got this motion sitting in the Ninth Circuit, and I have about as much faith in the Ninth Circuit as I have of, gum jumping off the ground and helping us. So we'll see what they do, but it's there. And maybe if people call them, they'll force them to act. But I think these guys, you can look at the year and a half that the judge in the district court just did nothing but sat on his hands for a year and a half. That's what these people are hoping for. So this goes away on them. That's what my guess is.
Mm-hmm. I think they're all hoping that that is what is going to happen. I'm actually going to put up on the screen right now an actual call to action, because I meant to do this earlier and I just forgot about this little detail, but it's important. We do have a call to action here because, Michael, it's pretty dangerous for the government to hide behind, quotes, jurisdiction. I mean, they are now opening up their whole can of really how they've been operating is using jurisdiction and trapping us into their jurisdiction. Just to be clear, the Constitution is for the Republic, for America, for Americans. The United States jurisdiction really is confined to anything that's a federally owned, and we're not federally owned, right? We're not a piece of property to the United States. And so we believe, because we're, quotes, U.S. citizens, that puts us in their jurisdiction. Well, it really technically doesn't. But it is such conflation when you read their U.S. codes and you understand the definitions of person and U.S. citizen and a national and so on, and resident alien, non-resident alien. They've made it very confusing. But if you take the time and dissect it, you can clearly see that Americans are not part of the United States corporation that are in their U.S. jurisdiction, which would make us culpable or liable to taxes because none of us are earning income. Well, not none of us. But the people here are not earning income inside the U.S. jurisdiction of Washington, D.C. and that federal corporate bureaucracy. So how dangerous is it at this point for the government to continue to keep hiding behind jurisdiction instead of just addressing the falsified records? Are they opening the kimono so widely now that we see the fraud and how they've been doing it?
Well, let's be real blunt. The judiciary is not, quote unquote, in on the scam. They're not taught centrally to misrepresent and so forth. We've watched the actions of the judges over the course of time, and sometimes they just they exhibit a knee-jerk reaction. It tells you that they're not really trained in how to deal with this problem. So instead what they do is they rest behind their immunity. They know that if they falsify the record, that makes it so. Let me say it like this. A judge makes a determination, for example, in this case, that Ben was complaining supposedly about the IRS preparing falsified returns. Ben never complained about that. Ben instead said the IRS has falsified its internal digital records and paper records derived from that to make it look like he filed a return when he didn't. The distinction there is that the judges falsified the record. This is the district court judges falsified the record to make it look like he was making an allegation he didn't. And then they ruled against their own allegation, which was frivolous, as Ben already said. So when you're dealing with judges who falsify records to help one party win, you realize there's something very corrupt. And it's not necessarily that the entire judiciary is corrupt. We're just saying when judges get faced with something difficult like this, they know they have to protect the income tax, and they literally will falsify the record, committing felonies. It's a felony, as Ben mentioned, 18 U.S.C. 1001. You cannot falsify a record as a judge in a court case to assist a person. So we really don't argue much about the rights of Americans in the jurisdiction issue, and because we simply argue about the fact that the records were falsified. No one can falsify records and come into court and expect the court to give them any relief. Now, that's the jurisdiction issue we talk about. It's called the clean hands doctrine. You walk into court having falsified every freaking record concerning somebody, you should not get any relief from that United States District Court, but instead they hum and haw for 5 years before the judge creates and invents his escape hatch, and it's a felony. So that's
right.
Our problem. We've got judges that commit felonies without there is no recourse.
So, Michael, what from a legal strategy does it tell you when the government refuses to answer the questions of substance, whether the IRS records are genuine and instead tries to push everything aside with jurisdiction and no serious questions, arguments? Do we even have a government that is really functional? Should we be listening to the government? Should we be following anything they say? What should we be doing?
Well, here's what we decided to do, amongst other things. Of course, we're appealing it, but the Court of Appeals is just as corrupt.
Right.
Court of Appeals, we've had a clerk issue to herself an order to herself to strike Ben's brief on appeal. This is the type of stuff that goes on at the Court of Appeals. Now, that's just as bad. But your question, could you reiterate that again?
Oh, sure. When you see a government that is, just so blatantly behaving in this fashion, do we follow the government? I mean, do we actually listen to what they're saying in any aspect of our lives at this point? Because
no,
they're completely falsifying everything. They're lying to steal property. At what point do we say this government isn't ours?
Well, we have to take it apart. And instead of being generalizing and being a broad brush, we very specifically filed what's called a complaint with the Treasury Inspector General of Tax Administration. Heather Hill is the leader of that part of the Treasury Department. We filed a complaint last year for the simple facts concerning the revenue officer who falsified the records himself using different inputs into the AIM system to be able to change the IMF. At any rate, long story short, this revenue officer was concealed during discovery of this lawsuit by an IRS attorney. So we filed a complaint with Heather Hill about those felonies. That was in October last year. And we still not heard anything from her this year. There is no way. If the TIGTA actually analyzes, does an investigation, and confirms exactly what we tell them to look for in their records, then that felony will be those felonies committed by both the IRS attorney as well as by the revenue officer. That will end the case, right? If they find what they should find, which we pointed out to them, here's where to look in the IRS records. This is what this revenue officer did, and here's what the IRS attorney did to conceal it. If they will confirm that, we're great, but she will not. So far, we have not heard anything from her. And this is where you come in.
Right. So we have been busy filing more Freedom of Information Act requests. We actually left a message yesterday for Heather Hill. And this is what we're asking people to do today, because this TIGTA complaint that you see here on your screen details the entire story behind what we are reporting this morning on this manufactured fraud that is being facilitated in a RICO criminal cartel syndicate known as your federal government. Oh, we've got some background noise. Maybe Mr. McNeil can go on mute. I'm not sure if it's his phone or not. But through this TIGTA complaint, you all have done a beautiful job of basically detailing everything that's happened and proven where the government has lied, covered up, and obfuscated the truth. So not only do we have this complaint, we're on the screen at the very bottom, you will see call acting Inspector General Heather Hill. She's in the tax information. Let's see, TIGTA. I forget.
Treasury Inspector General for Tax.
Thank you.
Yes.
Too many acronyms this morning, and I
Right.
haven't had enough coffee. Treasury
Right.
Inspector General of the Tax Administration's office. She's acting right now, but I did leave a message for her. I have sent her an email, and we have, approached her before. You have a FOIA, a Freedom of Information Act, that you've already perfected, as a matter of fact.
Yes.
This is her phone number. This is her email. What we're asking everybody to do is please, please, please contact Miss Hill here politely and, reference this TIGTA complaint, as you see on the screen here, so that perhaps she can give us a status update. Tell us why, Mr. Howe, if you get a status update as to when this complaint and investigation by TIGTA is completed, if you know when that completion date is, why that's important in your case right now in the appeal you have in the Ninth Circuit. How will that help you?
Well, I don't know that it'll help me if doesn't happen before they take control of the property. But if they have to admit that everything that Marler did to falsify the records, well, that's a felony right there. And then you've got the concealing of a felony, which for by an attorney, I don't know, Michael, you can correct me, that's misprision of felony, because she knows that a felony was created and didn't report it. So if the Ninth Circuit has any integrity, if this comes out that, yes, they actually committed crimes, then the entire clean hands is proven correct, and this case should have been tossed 6 years ago.
Okay, I'm going to add the actual complaint here into Ms. Hill's.
One other thing too, Ann, is that Michael actually got a hold of them to try to get an update on this, because like I said, this was filed in fall of 2024. And when they responded back, they tried to say that it was just a FOIA request instead of actually doing an investigation, to try to wash their hands of it that way. And I think it was you or someone that you were in contact with that said, do not let them do this. So the FOIA that is currently in there or going to be sent, whatever, is it doesn't give them the right to just weasel out of this complaint as just a FOIA request, and they actually have to do some kind of investigation into these criminals.
Good. All right, Rob, get us up to speed. Everything that's been submitted, the Freedom of Information Act requests, the open appeal right now that needs to be responded to in the Ninth Circuit. The fact that you've got Mr. Howe's home about to be confiscated by the federal government, you're trying to stop it. We've reached out to the marshals, we've reached out to PALS. We've reached out to the DOJ, to the IRS. We're hitting everybody and saying, here's all the evidence to prove that what you're doing is based on fraud, and you have faulty evidence. And you all have been very gracious. You've said maybe you didn't almost realize what happened, but now it's pretty obvious. It's very blatant. Whistleblowers like Joe Bannister. I've had Brandon Howes, a fellow broadcaster, called me the other day. He said, Ann, they did the same thing to me. And I'm getting emails from people all over the country explaining the same thing. So this is not an isolated case. This is real-time fraud on millions of Americans. So, Mr. McNeil, can you kind of, summarize where you think this is going to go as an auditor? If the Ninth Circuit doesn't step up and hear what is, hear the truth and act on it, what's the next thing? Are we going to the Supreme Court?
We've already been in the Supreme Court a couple of times, and they refused to hear the case. So I have no faith at all in the Supreme Court. So honestly, I don't know. We're going to continue the battle. Michael knows the strategy. He's the guy, and I'm more of the administrative guy. I file cases, I edit motions, things like that. But Michael's the strategist. I'd ask you to ask him that question.
Well, Michael, then why don't you step in and tell us what you think is going to happen next?
Well, first of all, we really strongly need to get as many people as possible to call Heather Hill. If we can get her to release that investigation, that, as Bob says, that there was felonies that have been committed, we can take that multiple ways. First, we would want to take that to the Ninth Circuit and file a motion that would be, you've been wrong already. There is substantive reason why this judgment should not be allowed. we would also take it to PALS. We'd show the head of PALS. We'd show the Marshal Service. This is the underlying felony set that makes the forfeiture void. So if we don't get anything from Heather Hill today or the next few days, it's going to make it more difficult, but it would help us immensely if she would do her, actually just commit to showing us what the results were, because she's supposedly been investigating this for nearly a year. And
Right.
it's time we need to see it. Now, if she doesn't do that, there's all sorts of ramifications and options. We, though, have, as Bob has said, we've gone to the Supreme Court and we found that Scott Harris, the clerk there, basically just treats the case as a kind of a diversion. These types of issues that we're raising, that the United States Treasury, actually the IRS, is running a RICO, basically a false record falsification program, that should be a first priority when it comes to the United States Supreme Court. But we always get these very nice little things that say declined. What other possible case could be more important than the IRS running a records falsification program? That's the agency that if anybody falsified their records, the agency would put him in prison.
That's
But
right.
instead, it's the agency that's falsifying records, and that's not significant enough. We don't think the judges at the Supreme Court have ever heard anything we've ever filed. Now, the reason why we're saying that, Ann, is because we've had actual judges state in the Court of Appeals in the 13th Circuit, or whatever that is over there in Florida, state that the judges at the Court of Appeals never read anything that's filed by pro se unrepresented litigants. They let staff attorneys read them and suggest orders, and cases are dismissed without ever addressing any issue that's raised. So that's
there you go. The bar is protecting other bar members, right? These low-level bar attorneys are protecting the ones they know are perpetrating the fraud. We just had another evidence of that in the Supreme Court with a writ of certiorari that went before it, pleading for the Supreme Court to hear this freedom of speech case, a censorship case, third time to the Supreme Court with 3 accompanying amicus briefs. Unheard of, right? To see a writ of certiorari and 3 amicus briefs go into the court, say, hey, we have a case and we can prove the government's in the wrong and we need the government to fall on the sword. And the government said, yeah, no, we're not going to take this 1A case. We're going to go talk about this Rastafarian, who's a prisoner that for manslaughter, that is concerned about having to cut his hair short because his dreadlocks are representative of his religious rights. And that was the case they chose to weigh in on versus, freedom of speech for 300 million Americans. So when we say the courts are captured and it's almost a dead end and it becomes a circular file we're around, it becomes a little bit desperate, except let's enter in, somebody I consider to be a hero, Ed Martin. We have put this package together, and I have been putting this out on social media as of this past week, that not only do we have them caught, you all have done the massive heavy lift of catching these scoundrels and these demons, but we've now incorporated Ed Martin's office and he's over there in weaponization and pardons to actually look at this stuff. We've sent it. I know it's been received. I spoke to people in his office. I met with Ed last month about some stuff. So this is proof positive here that this memo not only went via email, but also via overnight, and it's been received. He has been made well aware of all of the exhibits, everything that's going on, and what we're doing. What we've asked him to do is also to weigh in by contacting acting Inspector General Heather Hill over at TICTA to say, hey, what is the status of this complaint TRN 2410-0364? When will you have your investigation completed? When will we get an answer? Because this answer is really hinging upon the ability for Mr. Howe to update his appeal and response in his appeal to the Ninth Circuit to stay the forfeiture of his home so they won't take it next Friday. And this is, can you imagine? I mean, I'm asking my audience right now, can you all imagine being in this position where the IRS is breathing down your neck? If you have ever been in this position, fraudulently so, and you didn't file a return, especially a 1040A, I want you to send me an email. Just go to my website, annvandersteel.com, and send me an email, because we're going to continue to build this case, and we're going to, pepper the United States government. And I believe Secretary of Treasury Scott Bessent, who took a question recently from Gary Franchi over at Next News Network, I believe, and he asked about Joe Bannister and a few other IRS whistleblowers. I believe Secretary Bessent is interested in hearing about this, because we've all been hearing the rumblings that perhaps maybe they want to abolish the IRS. So, I think this case is, prima facie evidence of why we should abolish the IRS, because they're crooks, criminals, thieves, and they're liars, essentially.
Hey, and we just want to point out one thing. Heather Hill and the TIGTA Treasury, those folks over there, are not in the judicial system. So what we're doing is going actually an end run around the judiciary, because the judiciary is totally corrupted. And I'm not saying that in a mean way. I'm just saying any judicial officer that touches this, they realize automatically where they're supposed to rule, favoring the government. So we have no relief in that, but in the judicial system. But we're right now going to Heather Hill to do an end run around the fact that the judiciary refuses to look at the evidence of the IRS record falsification program.
Right.
They find all sorts of excuses why they don't have to look at it. They're stupid. Nothing makes any sense. But this end run is extremely important to Ben's future here as far as owning that house, because Heather Hill can show us what underlying felonies that the judges refused to review in Ben's case.
Right.
So if we get that evidence in a review from Heather, where she says, here's what that IRS revenue officer did, and here's how this IRS attorney covered it, that's going to expose the whole thing. And then we'll just take that to the courts and say, here's what you covered up so far.
Right.
Leave this house alone.
Right. And you even stated that it's very clear on June 24th of this year, the clerk, Molly Dwyer, the clerk ordered herself to strike your brief. I mean, completely absurd. That must have been totally absurd to see that in writing. There wasn't any judicial signature. There was no reason giving. So again, when it comes back to fraud on the court and by the court, what does that say about the appellate process? And what does it say about the Supreme Court process? Do we have any courts at all that you think are going to give us a fair shake here? And how do we turn? Sorry, go ahead.
That's exactly why we've gone to Heather Hill on this outside the court kind of end run. So you're right. You're correct. But Heather Hill has a problem, because these two actors, two IRS agents, as you pointed out, they are right squarely in the remit of the TIGTA to be able to determine whether or not they committed the crime. Again, it's worth reiterating, the judges refused to look at the evidence of the IRS record falsification program. If we get Heather to look at it and produce a simple report that there's something stinky here, then we hand that to the judiciary and say, you have erred. Get out of the way.
Okay. Ben, what does it say about whether Americans live under a constitutional government or agency corporatocracy?
It's been dead for 40 years. Getting back to the court thing, like you said, one of the things the appeals court will do is just dismiss this with no comment whatsoever, basically giving you nothing to appeal to the Supreme Court for. They just, the district court's right, done. And you don't have any technical issue that you can bring to the Supreme Court. So that's how they get around not having to deal with that. But it's just the current state of the country is not what I signed up for the Marine Corps for back in the 80s. So it's disappointing.
Yeah, I would agree. It's our country is in massive crisis. We're completely captured, absolutely captured. I mean, you've said repeatedly, Ben, that you owe nothing to the government that falsified its own records. That has been the core of your defense. And it should be. I mean, frankly, what the IRS has done to Americans and what the Federal Reserve has done, what this international banking cabal, that just the actual, initiation of bringing an IRS online, the 16th Amendment, the Federal Reserve, all of it is complete fraud on the people. And I think the people are finally waking up. You all have been called the Three Musketeers of David's fighting Goliath. What do you all continue to do in the future? I want to start with Bob McNeil, because you're the taxation specialist. You've done audits. I'm sure that if you saw this kind of malfeasance in corporations, you would be absolutely going after them like a dog with a chew toy. It must be incredibly frustrating to be a professional that is responsible for audits, to see audits like this just fabricated by the IRS and leave a paper trail that's now been caught through the Freedom of Information Act request that Mr. Howe's been doing all this time. catching the government in their own malfeasance. This is a Gordian knot, so to speak, but how do you think we untangle this, Mr. McNeil?
Here's where I would start. What we learned in the very first lawsuit that we filed against the IRS, and the DOJ responded to the complaint. The first thing they did was file a motion to dismiss based on the 1871 Tax Injunction Act. And in that case, the Supreme Court ruled in 1871, no court shall have jurisdiction to hear any case involving the assessment or collection of any tax. They completely, the Supreme Court removed the jurisdiction of tax issues from the courts. So that's the basis for the DOJ saying, Judge, you don't have any jurisdiction to even hear this case. You need to dismiss it, and the judge does. That's their easy out. So the first thing is to repeal the 1871 Tax Injunction Act.
Okay, Michael, do you concur with that?
Well, yes, but I think we're on the right path because we're really not arguing, whether you are a U.S. citizen or whether there's gold fringe on the flag or any of that. We're arguing one thing: you cannot commit a crime as a government officer to enforce the law. So it's a very clean kind of argument. Make sense? So that's why we're after Tigta today, is simply to get her to respond, tell us whether crimes were committed, and the case will go away.
Okay. All right. I'm in awe of the three of you. I think it's phenomenal that you have stood together, an unlikely group comes together, but all because you're standing for truth, you're standing for honesty, and really, frankly, what our founding fathers sacrificed when they decided to put their name to paper. And 56 men sacrificed their lives, fortunes, and their sacred honor to create what I consider to be the most incredible republic ever born on the planet. God made this second covenant nation for us, and it's up to us to protect it. So I'd like to hear from each of you, starting with Mr. Howe. What is your message to Americans listening today who are watching this and wondering, what can I do to protect myself and my family from this beast system?
One, question everything. They don't tell you the truth. They are out for power, and that's all they care about, the elites. So question absolutely everything. When they tell you something, there's an ulterior motive behind it, almost assuredly. And be prepared to that this country was supposed to be made on freedom and rugged individualism. Don't rely on the government to help you, because they're not there to help you. What was it, Reagan? The 9 most scary words. I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. So just be prepared to do it yourself, and don't be afraid of them either. That's another thing I found out a long time ago. The first time I ever walked into an IRS office and I had my own copy of the tax code, that was like bringing a cross to a vampire. So it's not like the people, they don't actually know the law. Half of the little minions don't know the law.
Right.
So yeah, question everything, and just try to be ready to fend for yourself in a sense that they're not there to help you. You have to help yourself.
Right. I love it. Mr. McNeil, how do you answer that question?
I concur with Ben. In my journey here, I had 3 meetings with a real nasty IRS agent who wanted me to bring all of my financial records to this meeting, give them to him so he could calculate what my alleged tax liability was. And so before the meeting, I wrote him a 25-page response on why I'm not required to give you these documents, and I'm not going to do it. And he was mad, and I plopped that document down on his desk. And he said, "This is just taxpayer rhetoric, anti-tax rhetoric." I said, "No, it's not. You should probably read it." But he never did. But that's who we're going up against. But when I first got involved in this, I decided as an auditor, number one, I get my ducks in a row. I read and I study and I know where I'm coming from. I know that I'm the one writing the truth. And that's a very, very powerful position to be in when you know the other side is not. And so I always went into these meetings, full of vim and vigor, and bring it. So that's what I would suggest. If you're ever in the situation, you're going to be contacted by the IRS first by letter, and I made the decision from the very beginning to respond to every letter that they sent me, and I did. So I now have for 5-year period or so, and they've never really responded to any of them.
You there?
So just know that you're in a powerful position.
Yes, we are. We are in a very powerful position. I appreciate that. Lastly, I want to give Michael an opportunity to respond to this as well.
The first recommendation I'd give to anybody that's entering into our society is don't lie. Don't file anything that's bad. I think each one of the people in this room will state that, or can agree that if you lie, if you falsify stuff, if you try to conceal things, you're going to set yourself up. That's what they're looking for. But if you are a person like us who didn't file any false documents, who simply, as Ben said, asked the questions, right? You have a responsibility in this nation to ask the question when a government agent comes to you, right. Do you have authority or not? Prove it. Right. And that's their weakness. When you yourself love truth enough to not screw around with that, and then you're looking at a government agent that's coming at you, they hide behind injustice, behind half-truths, smoke and mirrors. And if you are honest yourself, they fear that it's like that proverbial cross to a vampire. They run away with their tails between their legs, typically. And listen, right. Here's one final thought on that. Interesting scripture is, we might not have won our case, quote unquote, won the case so far, but that to us does not stop the quality, or shall we say, the unbelievable fraud of every attorney we've ever faced tells us that we are right. So although we might not quite win yet, we're on the right path, and we will stay the course until we get justice reestablished in this nation.
Amen. From your lips to God's ears, America, you are being asked to please step into the ring. There's a phone number right there and an email on your screen on the bottom. You can't miss it. It's a bright green banner, heather.hill at tigta.treas.gov. Her phone number, if you want to call her, and I did yesterday and left a nice detailed message, is 202-927-7084. And if you just tell her you're following up on a complaint that has been registered, the complaint number is TRN 2410-0364. Again, all of this is on the screen. Please follow up on the complaints and find out if you can get a status update. If you can get a status update, you can send me a DM on X. You can email me. If you go to AnnVandersteel.com and find out if there's a status update, when this complaint is going to be resolved. What is their findings? Because we need that information to tell the Ninth Circuit to say, hey, we're going to get a status update. They're going to resolve this investigation. And we're going to have the evidence one way or the other to go into the appeal that's being filed in the Ninth Circuit. But we really need to get this information into the Ninth before they take Mr. House home, which is next week, next Friday. So we're on a very short deadline. And we just don't want them to, because once they take something, it's really hard to get it back. And it becomes a whole other level of court. And we now know how corrupt the judiciary is. And they just drag it out. They wear you out with time because they have all the time and we don't. So it's a machine that we're up against. It's a Goliath. But I believe tonight you've heard from 3 gentlemen and there's more coming. So again, if you have been aggrieved by the IRS in a form or fashion, go to my website, ann@annvandersteel.com. Send me an email. I want to hear from you. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me this morning. I appreciate you, and you are the Davids of our time.
Thanks, Ann.
Thanks for having us, Ann.
Yep, God bless.
Blessing to you.
Okay, we've now heard how Joe Bannister's whistleblower became undeniable proof in the case of Mr. Ben Howe. We've seen how the IRS falsified records, how the DOJ covered it, and how the judiciary enabled it, while clerks strike briefs without judges even reading them. We showed you exhibits, and by the DOJ's own admissions, and white papers all telling the same story, that America's tax system is not about law, it's about fraud. The IRS is not one of the 19 constitutionally enumerated powers. It's an agency cartel extracting wealth through fabricated records and judicial complicity. Mr. Ben Howe, Mr. Michael Ellis, and Mr. Bob McNeil are showing this, that resistance is possible, that truth, faith, and persistence can expose the fraud, but exposure is not enough. Accountability must follow. As long as Americans allow unelected bureaucrats to masquerade as lawful government, the theft will continue. This is Steel News. I'm Ann Vandersteel, and we stand with the Davids fighting Goliath because the Constitution, liberty, and truth are worth defending. God bless. I'm going to play you out with a little IRS fraud to remind you there is no law that says you must file and sacrifice and give away your hard-earned money to the infernal Revenue Service.
There is no law, and to date, nobody has been able to show that there is a law for the average American citizen working day in and day out to pay an income tax.
But We the People Foundation for Constitutional Education put a full-page ad in the USA Today on July 7th, 2000. And within the body of that ad was a $50,000 challenge for anyone that could show the law. And to me, $50,000 is a lot of money. So I went after that and did the research based on the fact that I thought, let's put this baby to bed. I'm hearing all these rumors. I'm going to kill two birds with one stone. I'll answer these people's questions that are asking me, and then I'll win this $50,000. And, based on the research that I did throughout the year 2000 and that I'm still doing, I have not found that law. I've asked Congress. We've asked a lot of people in the IRS commissioners, helpers. They can't answer, because if they answer, the American people are going to know that this whole thing is a fraud.
There is no law that requires the average American worker in the private sector to pay a direct, unapportioned tax on their labor and compensation for services. There is no law.
I really expected that, of course, there's a law that you can point to in the law book, the code that requires you to file a tax return. Of course there is. Maybe I don't know what it is right then as he was speaking to me, but sure. So naively, I agreed to go off and research it and get back to him. 3.5 months later, I was at that point where I couldn't find the statute that clearly made a person liable, at least not me and most people I know. And I had no choice in my mind except to resign.
I had to leave the IRS because I presented evidence that I had accumulated indicating that the agency was violating the law and violating people's rights. And I asked the agency for a response to my sincere concerns. And the answer I got was that they would not respond to my concerns and that they would provide me with the paperwork necessary to tender my resignation.
You can look through the statutes and look for the law that requires you to pay. And when you do that, you can't identify a law that requires the average person in America who earns a wage and works in private business to pay an income tax.
American citizens, along with the foundation, have been asking the IRS to specifically provide them with the underlying legal foundation upon which they administer and enforce the personal income tax laws in our country.
At the national level, when people would attempt to contact somebody of a much higher authority, say the commissioner, same kind of thing. They would get answers that were in effect non-answers.
You have to understand that an agency which will unlawfully impose a tax that doesn't exist is not going to care. If we, the people, don't know what our rights are, they're not going to tell us.
If Americans just learned that the IRS was actually knowingly deceiving them, that would be enough for them to rise up and put a stop to it.
100% of what is collected is absorbed solely by interest on the federal debt. All individual income tax revenues are gone before 1 nickel is spent on the services taxpayers expect from government. People have been told, that you need this income tax system to fund government, which is absolutely ridiculous. My question is, well, if that's true, how did we fund government from 1776 to 1913?
The main purpose of the income tax is not to raise revenue, but to redistribute wealth and to control society.
A lot of people might say, well, gee, if there wasn't an income tax, what would happen to education? They don't understand that education is paid for the most part, out of state and local taxes, your property tax. People might say, well, how are we going to build and maintain our highways if there's no money coming into the government? We need our highways. There is a tax on every gallon of gasoline that people buy. Proceeds from the income tax do not pay for highway construction.
I believe that in both spirit and substance, our tax system has come to be un-American. Death and taxes may be inevitable, but unjust taxes are not.
This small booklet includes the Constitution of the United States, the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence. This is a document that every citizen should read. It's a document which freed an entire nation. This is the Internal Revenue Code, and this document, and the unlawful application of this document by the Internal Revenue Service has enslaved the nation that this document attempted to free.